In these perilous times, see from current events how biblical prophecy is coming to pass in front of our eyes. You're watching In the Last Days, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. With Martin and Natalie Blackham, thank you to our friends and partners who make this program possible. Now, here's Martin and Natalie.
Hi, welcome to the In the Last Days television program. Very excited today to have David Wilder on the program from Hebron. Welcome. He's come specially from the city of Hebron to be with us here in Jerusalem in the television studio. And I'll just give you a quick bit of news and then we'll go straight to David. This is from the Jerusalem Post. It says, and this is their, let me just get this on the camera for you. It says, Palestinians IDF clash in Hebron for fourth day, and it says with a flick of the wrist, if they were tossing a tennis ball, an IDF soldier threw a stun grenade into a small group of Palestinian protesters who had gathered in Hebron on Thursday in hopes of marching to the cave of the patriarch. So Hebron is really in the news, so it's great to have you with us, David. You're a familiar face, I guess, to many of our viewers. They've seen you on BBC and on other news channels. How did you get involved in Hebron, and because you're originally from the United States?
Yeah, I grew up in New Jersey. I've been in Israel now for about 35 years. I've been living in the Hebron area since 1981 and working for the community for 16 years now. And how did I get involved? God picked me up and plucked me and put me down there. I mean, basically, I studied in Hebron in a yeshiva many years ago. And at some point, about 16 years ago, I was looking for a job. And they basically, their office didn't exist at that time, and they needed somebody to help them run a computer, and nobody knew what they were doing with it. So I came in and just started doing administrative work. And that's when, you know, Oslo and then the following Hebron Accords began. And first I started giving some tours. There was nobody really giving English tours, and I used to hang around the Tomb of the Patriarchs and try to pick people up and speak to them about that. And then reporters started coming in, and I spoke English. And I guess I figured out what to say to them and started working with journalists, and that just sort of, I don't know, I guess it grew. And for the past 15 years or so, that's what I've been doing in communications work. You know, on the one hand, it's communications. People call me a spokesperson. I work with film, video, and still photography, and do a lot of writing and internet. But the truth is, people really say, but what do you really do? I say it's education. I try to educate people to understand what Israel is, what Hebron is, what the Jewish people are doing here.
Now, a kind of a bit of a biblical background. We've got almost the first mention is Abraham when he comes to the trees, isn't it, at Mamre, which is adjacent to Hebron. And that's the kind of first mention we get. But I was reading in the book, The Cave of Machpelah, that, that there's a kind of a understanding of the rabbis that it may well have been, this is the cave at Machpelah in Hebron, it may well have been the place where Adam and Eve were buried. That's
very true. That's why this site is considered to be the second holiest site to the Jewish people in all the world, after Temple Mount here in Jerusalem. It's written that after the first man and the first woman were exiled from the Garden of Eden, they wanted to go back. It was nice there, you know. They had some good food, and there were flowers, pretty nice smells. They had a problem. They didn't know where it was. They'd been expelled, the gates had been locked, and they had to search. And it's written that they came to a particular place where they could smell the unique fragrances of the Garden of Eden. And that's where it says the first man dug a cave within a cave until a voice from the heavens said, that's as far as you can go. And that's where Adam buried Eve, and that's where he was buried. And that remained hidden until the days of Abraham, who discovered that. And that's why we call this the entrance to paradise. It's written in our holy books that when a person's soul leaves our body on the way to wherever we go, it goes through the caves of Machpelah. And whoever's so privileged is greeted at the end of that cave by Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the first man, who escort that soul to their place in the next world.
Now, one of the things about Hebron is that it's not an easy place to live because you've got all the neighbors who are maybe not so friendly, the Arab neighbors. And I know that you used to live in Kiryat Arba, but you've moved now to Bet Hadassah. Now, how close is that to the Tomb of the Patriarchs, and what's it like living there?
Well, we lived in Kiryat Arba for 17 years. We moved down to Beit Hadassah 11 and a half, almost 12 years ago. We've been living there ever since. And when you say that it's difficult to live there, I didn't understand if you were referring to me or my neighbor. It's very difficult for the Arabs that we live in Hebron because we're there. But for us, it's privilege and a tremendous privilege to live there. What's it like to live there? First of all, from the cave of Machpelah, from Ma'arat Machpelah, by car, 2 minutes. Walking, depends how fast you walk, anywhere between 5, 7, 10 minutes, walking straight down the road. And what's it like to live there? It's very special. You know, just like anything, when you do it for a long time, you tend to get used to it, and then sometimes you sort of take it for granted. But every once in a while, you have to wake yourself up and say, here I am, because you're walking not only in the footsteps of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and King David, who lived in Hebron for 7.5 years, but you're walking in the footsteps of hundreds of thousands of people who lived in Hebron, and also in the footsteps of those who could never live in Hebron. And the way I see it, we're also walking or trying to keep Hebron for those in the future. My grandchildren and great-great-great-great-grandchildren, they should be able to live there also. So it's a tremendous obligation. Never a dull moment. There's always something going on. And if there isn't, then we make sure that something's going on. But there are a lot of good things that happen. It's not just, you know, people only hear about Hebron or places like this when something bad happens, you know, when there are riots or I don't know, and nobody ever hears about the good things. Okay, just a month and a half ago, over the Passover holidays, we had, I don't know, I guess we had close to 50,000 people in Hebron. And this summer we're expecting a lot of people also. We have different events that happen, and it's a very special place to be able to live. Certainly one has to take precautions, but we have to take precautions today anywhere we live. Because today, basically, a Jew in Israel is marked wherever he is. It doesn't matter if he's in Hebron, or in Jerusalem, or in Tel Aviv, or in Haifa, or in Beersheba. Because the people that don't want me in Hebron also don't want me in Tel Aviv. So what difference does it make? We know that if we didn't live in Hebron, we know who would live in Hebron. If we didn't have access to the Tomb of the Patriarchs, which we didn't for 700 years, then we know who would. And in order to see to it that these sites are accessible to anybody, anytime they want, we know that we have to be there. We, not just individually, but as a state, as a country, the state of Israel has to be there. And, you know, nobody has to stay there. Nobody puts a gun to our heads and said, you have to put a gun, and they say we have to leave, but nobody says we have to stay. But people do stay. And our kids are getting married and they want to stay. And there are stories of people who left Hebron for better housing conditions or whatever, and after a couple of years they came back. Even to, you know, to these mobile homes, from beautiful homes that came back. One of the men in Hebron is a rabbi. He's the head of the yeshiva high school in Kiryat Arba, just right outside Hebron. Has kids there from all over the country, and he has a dormitory, and he lived in Hebron for a while, and he decided that because he was the dean of the school, he should really live there. So he told his children, we're going to buy a plot of land right next to the school, we'll have a yard, and you can play outside, and we won't live amongst the city. And the children stopped him, and they said, Abba, Father, if you want, you and Mom can go live there. We're staying here. You know, and they stayed. I mean, you know, and this is common. It's not something that's unusual, which means that it draws people in. It's a magnet. It really is. It gets into your soul, and it really never leaves.
Now, I think it'd be good just for the viewers, to give them a bit of a biblical background. This is, well, there's the covenant with Abraham, the covenant of circumcision, then we have Lot and his daughters, and the death of Sarah, and that's really where we first come across it. And it said, Sarah lived to be 127 years old. She died in Kiryat Arba, which is where you used to live, but you now live closer to the cave.
In the Bible, Kiryat Arba and Hebron are synonymous.
Okay.
They're all one and the same.
And it says, in the land of Canaan, Abraham went to mourn for Sarah, to weep over her. Then Abraham rose from beside his dead wife and spoke to the Hittites. He said, I'm an alien and a stranger. Sell me some property for a burial site so that I can bury my dead. And then it goes on to talk about that he was a prince, and we know that he was overcharged for this cave, but he actually paid for it. And it's one of the places in Israel where nobody can say that it wasn't paid for by the Jewish people, that he paid, in fact he paid more than, as I was saying, he paid more than he should have done. And it says he buried his wife Sarah in the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave were legally, if people have got one of those highlighter pens. Now, not everybody agrees that it's legally, isn't it? It's the government. I mean, one of the good things that's happened recently is that your Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, has made the Tomb of the Patriarchs, I understand, a place of heritage, which must be a good thing.
Look, it's written here in the Bible that Abraham paid 400 silver shekels. According to studies that have been done not too long ago, that's somewhere between $700,000 and $750,000. And it's very clear that he paid that money because he understood that if he didn't put the money down on the table and sign on the dotted line, that one day somebody would say, we'll let you use it, but give it back to us. And you're right, there are a few places that are written in the scriptures that we purchased, very clearly so. Joseph's tomb in Shechem, Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and the Tomb of the Patriarchs in Hebron. These are probably the most three controversial places in Israel and perhaps in the world today. Okay, Israel is at the heart of everything today, and of course, places like Jerusalem and Hebron are in the heart of Israel. But we know that that this is. I tell people when we're in Hebron that it's not only the roots of the Jewish people. This is the roots of all of monotheism. This is the roots of modern civilization as we know it today, beginning with Abraham. And you know, and when you think about the magnitude of that, what I always find so amazing isn't that Abraham lived in Hebron almost 4,000 years ago. What I find that blows me away is that we're still there today. 4,000 years later, I live there with my children and grandchildren. We have 3 generations in Hebron. And that's there's no other people in the world that can say that. And this isn't just for us, this is for all of humanity. This is a holy city. And the word Hebron itself means lechaber, to join, to bond together. It also means in Hebrew and English the word friend, chaver. The Arabs call it al-khalil, which means the friend. But this is our essence. This is pre-Jerusalem, and we want to ensure that people are able to live the Bible. They're able to live their roots today in the 21st century. And it's unique.
It's a modern day miracle because the land of Israel was for many years, it was impossible, well, I say impossible, but it wasn't easy to be here, but then there was the Turkish Ottoman Empire, the British Mandate, and then the exciting announcements that Israel would be a nation again, although there was some sadness I was reading because the Rabbi Cook was saying the partition
Yes.
was a problem with
Yes.
Hebron.
Yes, well look, you know, it's interesting, you mentioned Netanyahu's announcement that this is a national heritage site. We really didn't need the Prime Minister in the year 2010 to inform us that it's a place of national heritage. Of course it deserves that recognition before any other site, excepting perhaps Temple Mount, which of course they didn't put on the list because that would be too much. But this is something that we know that all of Hebron is a place of national heritage. It's a place of international heritage. And you're right. You know, there are people that say otherwise. When the state was created, look, Jews lived in Hebron continuously for thousands of years. until the riots in 1929. The riots in 1929, which were incited by Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was basically the founder of the PLO. He considered Arafat to be his successor in the terrorism against the Jewish people, and we're seeing this today reaching New York. I mean, you know, the guy that was going to blow up the car down in Times Square was from Pakistan with the Taliban. They're all coming together. And this is we have to try to stop that. And our way of stopping that is to be right where we are, and to understand that this is, you know, it's written. If you don't have a past, then what's your future? You have to know where you're coming from in order to know where you're going to, and that's what we're doing there. And you're right. When the state was created in 1948, the partition plan that came into being in the United Nations on November 29th, 1947, there was sadness. However, those rabbis then, Rav Tzvi the Cook, understood that we have to start. And of course, the Arabs rejected that partition plan. We came back to Hebron in 1967. We returned home. We didn't occupy, conquer a foreign city. We lived where Jews had lived for hundreds and thousands of years until we were murdered in the 1929 riots and expelled. The British, who were then in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, took the survivors and threw them out. And so we came back home.
Now, when you got there, what was it like? Because you arrived there in the 70s?
I arrived in Hebron. The first time I was in Hebron, I remember the first time I was in Hebron. It was in 1974 when I was here in university. I didn't know anything about anything. I certainly didn't have a yarmulke on my head, and I knew I was Jewish and I was in Israel for a year, but I was certainly lived a different lifestyle from what I live today. And I remember going to Hebron. I came in on a Shabbat on an Arab bus. And I remember going to the Tomb of the Patriarchs. I don't remember if I appreciated what it was, but what I remember more than anything else was that we went down, I was with two other people, we went down to where the old Arab market was, which is today where my office is, in the Avram Avinu neighborhood. And it was packed. And I was an American kid walking around there. I mean, you know, and I saw the Arabs, and I saw their eyes looking at me, and I saw the hate in their eyes. And it was the first time that year that I was in Israel that I saw that, and that I felt it. I mean, it was tangible, you know, and I don't remember if I understood it. I may have. There were political problems back then too in 1974, but I came to live in the Hebron area in 1981. What was it like? Look, you're talking about, it's almost, you know, a few lifetimes ago. You know, you're before the Second Intifada, before the First Intifada, before Oslo. There was a very small group of people living in Hebron, Kiryat Arba. The community just outside was much smaller than it is today. It was a different atmosphere. It was a different life. And things certainly have changed tremendously in the last almost 30 years.
If you're watching the program today, we've got David Wilder on from the Hebron community. We're very privileged to have you today, and we're talking about Hebron and its importance in Israel and to the Jewish people. And if people are watching today, and you know, we get people watching who are very keen to visit Israel. How easy is it for them to visit Hebron?
No, it's very, very easy to get to Hebron today. We run tours. First of all, there are a lot of tour guides that do come in. But we have tours that we run during the summer 2 and 3 times a week, during the winter once a week. We also have private tours. It's very easy to make reservations, very inexpensive through our website, the Hebron website, hebron.com, hebron.com. There's a section called Visit Hebron, and there you can actually make the reservations online and come in and see Hebron. We have wonderful tours. People enjoy them. Sometimes, we're told many times that the day in Hebron is the highlight of people's vacations. And it's not because I give the tour or one of my friends gives the tour, it's because it's Hebron. It just sweeps you away, you know, and you see these places. You go up to see excavations from the days of Abraham and from the days of King Hezekiah and the days of King David, and you see it. You don't just hear about it, it's there, you can touch it. You see the tomb of Jesse, King David's father, and then come down and hear the stories about the different places over the centuries. And then when you finally go into the Tomb of the Patriarchs, you know, there are people who have these, really spiritual kind of antennas. They go in and they feel things. I'm not like that, but there are people that do, and they go in there, and their antennas start to buzz. It just picks them up and carries them away, because it's a very spiritual place. Hebron is a city, and we know what cities are like, especially when you have the kinds of issues that we deal with, but it's also very, very spiritual. And people that come in and see it and feel it and partake in, 3-4 hours, it's an amazing experience. And I would recommend anybody that comes to Israel who really wants to see it, because you can listen to me talk, you can see interviews, and you can read about it. Until you're there and you feel it, it's very difficult to comprehend.
And it's amazing to think that you can walk where Abraham walked, and Isaac and Jacob. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about, which I found, there's a book, I don't know if that you can get hold of that?
On the internet,
yeah,
PDF,
yeah.
You can pick it up on our website.
It's called The Cave of Machpelah, Roots of the Jewish People. This is a fabulous book. Having said that, you do need to go to Hebron and visit the tomb of the patriarchs, really, as David was saying. But I just wanted to talk a bit about these caves, because this is fascinating for me, because, with the possibility of Adam and Eve, and absolutely intrigued me when we were with you. Now, the access to the caves was very difficult, wasn't it, until 1968?
The access to the caves there was no access. Okay, the building on top of the caves of Machpelah was built 2,000 years ago by Herod. It's probably the only 2,000-year-old building in the world that still exists in its entirety, and it's still used. And it's probably still used for the same purpose for which he built it, which is amazing. Inside the building, you have a downstairs and an upstairs. The downstairs we had no access to at all, and for 700 years we had no access upstairs either. Jews and Christians weren't allowed in. By the way, when people ask us why we're there, our neighbors tell us straight out that if they ever won't let us in, they say it's a mosque and only Muslims can pray there. So I've asked numerous journalists, the building was built 600 years before Muhammad was born, but it's still a mosque, and it's only a mosque, and that's all it's ever been, and it's a church also. But in any case, when we finally were able to get back in, there was only one place that was known of, that was accessed, the downstairs area where the caves actually are, and nobody really had use of that. It's a very, very small hole. In 1968, a little girl was sent down. They tied a rope around her waist and lowered her all the way down, and she didn't discover the caves. She discovered an underground tunnel, and she sort of found she was lowered down into a room which was empty as far as she could see, in a tunnel that went all the way underground, which is probably Herodian. The room that she was in may go back even to the time of the Hasmoneans, to the Maccabees, but that was all she discovered. People were able to actually find and enter the original caves themselves in 1981, when they also were able to access that room through another entrance that they discovered, and they were looking in this big room, and there was nothing there. And one of the men had a candle, and he was looking on the floor, and it extinguished. He relit it again, it went out. He put his hands on the floor. He felt wind coming up from underneath. There's air coming up. There has to be something there. They started to push away the rocks, and that's when they discovered the entrance into the actual caves of Machpelah. And they burrowed in on their stomachs. They found themselves in a large cave. They went all the way through it. At the end of the cave, they came to the entrance of the second cave. Ma'arat Machpelah literally means double cave. The second cave was much smaller than the outer cave. It was all full up. It had been filled in, so they didn't have any way to really dig down. They did discover remnants of pottery and remnants of human bones, which had to have been, they must have thought, like, I don't know what they thought they were when they found the bones. But actually it was later determined that the pottery was from about 2,900 years ago, the days of King Solomon, the Judean kings, when it seems that people would bring bones of others that had already died, were deceased, in these clay jars into the caves, so they'd be buried adjacent to the patriarchs, the matriarchs. Now these guys, when they were down there, had to leave before they were discovered. If the Arabs had found them down there would have been another jihad or something. So they stopped and they prayed. Now in the prayers that we say 3 times a day, we talk about the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. I mean, this is it. This is where they'd been for, you know, thousands of years. And here there are Jews praying right there. These are probably the first Jews there in thousands of years. It was amazing. And they finished and came back up. And when it was discovered they'd gone down, that entrance where they had been able to access through was sealed. We have pictures, we have photographs inside the caves themselves. It's a fascinating story. We know exactly where the caves are. And I hope that the day will come and, you know, there's a tremendous amount about that building that we know nothing about. And we've had no way to investigate, only for political reasons. And I hope and pray that the day comes and we'll be able to access other areas, see what else is down there, if anything at all. And you know, you mentioned as a heritage site, this site has to be given honor as such a unique place for the Jews and for anybody. It has to be shown such respect and such honor and such glory. And for that reason, it was important that the Prime Minister acknowledged, he didn't make it a heritage site, he acknowledged the heritage of the Jewish people and all of monotheism, which started at that very site.
Well, it's been great to have you on the program today. David, thank you so much for coming in from Hebron. I'm sure if you'd like to get in touch with David, that you'd be happy for them to contact you. The details are on the screen as I'm speaking. There are also, if you'd like to contact us, there's details on the screen, how you can reach us. And also if you'd like to donate, and they can contact you about that. Great to have you on the program today. We love you and God bless you. And remember, we're living in the last days.
You've been watching In the Last Days, a TV program with Martin and Natalie Blackham, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective.